The metallic scent of rust and sweat filled the humid air, a suffocating blend of despair and neglect. The slave market was alive with a cacophony of voices, alien dialects merging into an unintelligible drone as creatures of all kinds bartered for flesh. The crowd pulsed with hunger, not for food, but for ownership, for power. Lyrian stood on the auction block, wrists bound in shimmering restraints that burned cold against her skin. The metal cuffs weren't necessary. She wasn't going to run. Where would she even go? Her captors had taken everything: her name, her freedom, her dignity. And now a rare find, the auctioneer bellowed, his forked tongue flicking between yellow teeth. Not much use, this one. Scarred. Broken. Barely worth feeding. Laughter rippled through the crowd, a cruel, grating sound. Lyrian clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She felt nothing anymore. Not shame. Not rage. Just the hollow resignation of someone who had long stopped hoping. A dozen bids came and went. Low offers. Insults. No one wanted damaged goods. Come now, no takers? The auctioneer's voice was laced with impatience. I'll start the bidding at 20 credits. Silence. 10? More silence. 1. I'll take her for 1. The voice cut through the jeering laughter like a blade, deep and commanding. The crowd turned, shifting uneasily as a lone figure stepped forward. A human. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in dark combat gear, the kind meant for someone who didn't plan on dying easily. His face was shadowed by a tactical visor, but his voice carried no hesitation. The auctioneer scoffed. 1 credit? You mock me, human! She's worth more? The man tilted his head, tone unreadable. The auctioneer hesitated, knowing the answer was no. Silence stretched, tense and heavy. Then, begrudgingly, the gavel struck. Sold. Lyrian was shoved forward, stumbling into her new fate. Character introduction: the weight of chains. She didn't speak as the human led her through the back alleys of the market. He walked with purpose, like a man used to commanding space. The crowd gave him a wide berth, either out of fear or respect, she wasn't sure. Name? His voice was neutral and passive. She didn't answer. You can speak, can't you? She nodded. Then use your words. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze. His visor was up now, revealing sharp, assessing eyes the color of stormlit steel. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. Lyrian, she said finally, her voice rough from disuse. He nodded once. Dane Cordith. The name meant nothing to her. Building tension, a choice offered. They reached the outskirts of the market, where a sleek black starship sat waiting. A few crew members lingered near the entrance, their eyes flicking toward her with curiosity, but none questioned their captain's choice. Lyrian waited for the inevitable. A command. A demand? Orders. Instead, Dane unlatched her cuffs with a small, effortless movement. The restraints clicked open, falling to the ground with a dull clang. She stared at them, uncomprehending. You're free. 2 words. They shouldn't have meant anything. And yet they sent a strange shock through her chest, something dangerously close to hope. She looked up at him, trying to understand. Why? His expression was unreadable. Because people like them don't decide your worth. Lyrian exhaled shakily, her pulse thudding in her ears. He was lying. This was a trick. She'd been owned before. There was always a price. But then he did the unthinkable. He turned away. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just space. An exit. A choice. She could leave. She could run. Or she could follow. She hesitated, every survival instinct screaming at her to be wary. But the truth was, she had nowhere else to go. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. And with that single movement, her fate changed forever. Climactic moment, a new hunt begins. As they boarded the ship, alarms blared in the distance. A slaver's voice echoed through the marketplace, laced with fury. Stop them! That human stole from us! Dane sighed, rolling his shoulders like a man ready for war. His crew tensed, hands hovering over weapons. Lyrian clenched her fists, heart hammering. She wasn't free yet. But for the first time in her life, she had something worth fighting for. The scent of burning fuel filled the cockpit as Dane Cordeth pushed the Argent Hawk into full thrust. The sleek, battle-scarred starship roared through the lower atmosphere, engines flaring against the darkness. Behind them, alarms shrieked through the slaver's den, a warning cry that the hunt had begun. Lyrian sat stiffly in the co-pilot's seat, fingers clenched in her lap. She wasn't shackled anymore, but the phantom weight of her restraints still pressed against her wrists. Dane's voice cut through the hum of the ship's controls. "They'll come after us." Hard. She swallowed. Of course they would. No one defied the Zethary and walked away unscathed. "Then why did you do it?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Dane didn't look at her. His hands moved with precision over the controls, but there was something simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I don't leave people in cages." It was such a simple statement, said as though it was a universal truth. But Lyrian had spent her life learning otherwise. She exhaled slowly, her nails pressing into the seat fabric. "That's not how the galaxy works." Dane finally turned his head, steel-gray eyes locking onto hers. "Then maybe it's time to change the galaxy." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. Character introduction, a mercenary's code. The Argent Hawk stabilized as they left the planet's gravity well, shifting smoothly into slipstream mode. Outside the viewport, the stars became streaks of silver, blurring as they moved faster than light. Dane leaned back in his seat, exhaling through his nose before finally looking at her again. "You don't trust me." It wasn't a question. Lyrian held his gaze. "No." "Good," he said, surprising her. "You shouldn't." "Not yet." She frowned. "Then why?" "Because I was you once." She froze. Dane leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze steady but unreadable. "Not in chains. But close enough. I know what it's like to be nothing. To be told you have no worth." Lyrian's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. Not from him. She searched his face for deception, but there was none. Just a man who carried his own ghosts. A long silence stretched between them before Dane stood and motioned toward the corridor. "Come on. I'll show you around." She hesitated, but followed. World building, a ship of strays. The Argent Hawk was larger than it seemed from the outside. It wasn't the pristine, high-tech warships she had seen in the hands of powerful races. It was lived in, worn, but sturdy. The corridors were lined with scuff marks and hastily patched repairs. The lighting flickered in places, a testament to years of close calls. It wasn't a soldier's ship. It was the survivors. They reached the main deck, where a handful of Dane's crew gathered. A broad-shouldered Carthian with deep crimson skin leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. His slitted yellow eyes flicked toward Lyrian, unreadable. "This the one?" he asked. Dane nodded. "Lyrian, this is Torin." The Carthian snorted. "Bold move, Captain. Zethary don't take well to losing their property." Lyrian tensed at the word, but Dane didn't flinch. "She's not property." His tone was steel. Torin studied her for a long moment before pushing off the wall. "Then I hope she's worth the trouble." With that, he walked off, leaving the tension in his wake. Lyrian's shoulders stiffened. "Your crew doesn't approve." Dane smirked. "Torin doesn't approve of anything." She didn't believe him. Building tension, the cost of freedom. They reached the armory, where weapons of varying sizes lined the walls. Dane reached for a sidearm, checked the power charge, then handed it to her. She hesitated before taking it. The weight was unfamiliar, too real. "You know how to use one of these?" Dane asked. Lyrian exhaled. "I know how to kill." Dane studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. "That's not the same thing." She hated that he was right. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "The Zethary will come after us." And if you want to survive, you're going to have to make a choice. Lyrian's fingers tightened around the weapon. What choice? Dane met her gaze. Whether you keep running, or start fighting. Something in her chest twisted, an ache she had long since buried. She had spent her life running. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. Climactic moment, the hunter becomes the prey. Before she could answer, the ship's alarms blared to life. Dane's head snapped up. Proximity alert. We've got company. They rushed to the cockpit. The display flickered with incoming data, 6 ships, fast, aggressive. Torin's voice crackled through the comms. Zethary hunters. They found us. Lyrian's stomach dropped. Dane's hands moved quickly over the controls. Brace for impact. The ship lurched violently as the first energy blasts struck their shields. The deck trembled beneath her feet. Lyrian's pulse pounded in her ears. The Zethary never took failure lightly. If they were here, they weren't just coming for her. They were coming for all of them. Dane turned to her, his gaze sharp. You still want to run? Lyrian inhaled sharply, then cocked the sidearm. No. Outside, the Zethary closed in. Inside, for the first time in her life, Lyrian felt something different. Not fear. Not despair. Determination. The Argent Hawk rattled violently as another plasma blast slammed into its shielding. Warning alarms blared in rapid succession, flashing a sickly red across the cockpit's control panels. Lyrian gripped the armrest of her seat as the ship banked hard to the left, dodging a second incoming attack. Through the viewport, the darkness of space was cut by the glowing green contrails of the Zethary hunters, their sleek, spear-like ships moving with unsettling precision. We can't outrun them. Torin growled through gritted teeth, hands flying over the weapon's console. We won't need to. Dane Cordith replied, voice steady. His jaw clenched as he pulled the ship into a sharp roll, narrowly avoiding another barrage. We make our stand here. Lyrian's stomach coiled with something sharp and unfamiliar. She had spent her life as prey, running, hiding, enduring. But now, with the ship shaking beneath her and fire lighting up the void, she realized something had changed. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. Character growth, the fighter awakens. Dane threw a glance over his shoulder. You ready to use that sidearm? Lyrian's fingers tightened around the grip of the weapon. Was she? She thought of the chains, the auction block, the leering faces that had decided she was worthless. The feeling of helplessness that had buried itself inside her, a wound that had never closed. No. She wasn't that woman anymore. She wouldn't be that woman anymore. Lyrian stood, jaw set, and met Dane's gaze. Tell me where I'm needed. His lips quirked slightly, approval, perhaps, or something more unreadable. He didn't waste time. Torin, get her to the gunnery station. Torin gave a sharp nod and motioned for her to follow. Come on, rookie. Time to see if you can actually fight. Building tension, the heat of battle. The gunnery station was cramped, its consoles humming with energy as targeting systems locked onto the enemy ships. Through the reinforced viewport, Lyrian could see the Zethary hunters circling like predators, their weapons charging for another strike. Torin slid into position, fingers flying across the panel. Manual targeting sup. Take the second turret. Lyrian hesitated only a moment before gripping the controls. The weapon systems vibrated beneath her hands, raw power humming through the ship's framework. Torin gave her a sharp look. Point and shoot, but don't waste your damn shots. These bastards are quick. A heartbeat later, the first Zethary ship peeled toward them, energy cannons glowing bright. Lyrian took a breath, focused, and pulled the trigger. The turret roared to life, spitting red-hot plasma into the void. The Zethary ship veered sharply, but not fast enough. Her shot clipped the wing, sending it into a chaotic spiral before Torin finished the kill with a well-placed blast to the cockpit. The enemy fighter detonated, a burst of fire and debris swallowed by the vacuum of space. Torin barked a laugh. Not bad, rookie. Lyrian barely had time to process the small thrill of victory before the next hunter closed in. Dialogue and development, the heart of a warrior. The ship shuddered as another impact rocked its shields. Sparks showered from an overloaded console, and the scent of burning circuitry filled the air. Dane's voice came through the comms, sharp and controlled. "Lyrian Torin, status?" Torin snarled as he fired another shot. "Holding, but these bastards are relentless." Lyrian's breath was quick, adrenaline buzzing in her veins. "We need to take out their leader." Torin paused, glancing at her. She swallowed, mind racing. "The Zethri don't just hunt, they follow orders. That one." She pointed at a ship hovering at a strategic distance, watching, directing. "He's the pack leader. If we take him out, the rest might break formation." Dane was silent for a moment. Then, "Do it." Torin smirked. "Guess we're taking orders from the rookie now." Lyrian ignored him. She focused, tracked the ship's movements, and exhaled. Wait for the right moment. The leader moved, just a fraction, lining up to fire. She fired first. The plasma round tore through its shield. The ship bucked, spinning wildly, and in the second it hesitated, Torin delivered the killing shot. The Zethri command ship erupted into a fireball. A moment later, the remaining hunters hesitated, then scattered into the void. Silence filled the comms for a beat. Then Dane's voice came through, low and satisfied. "Nice shot." Climactic moment, a new purpose. Lyrian sank back in her seat, hands trembling, but not from fear. Torin gave her an appraising look. "Gotta admit, you've got a hell of a shot." She barely heard him. Something inside her had shifted. She had fought back. And won. Dane entered the gunnery bay, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a long moment, then simply said, "You're not just a survivor anymore." She swallowed hard, heart pounding. He was right. And the Zethri? They would never own her again. The Argent Hawk drifted in the vast emptiness of space, battle-worn but victorious. The silence that followed the skirmish was almost deafening. No alarms, no weapons fire, only the occasional hum of the ship's stabilizers as it adjusted to the absence of immediate danger. Lyrian sat in the gunnery station, staring out at the wreckage of the Zethri's ships floating like shattered bones against the void. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by something heavier. Torin exhaled from beside her. "You did good, rookie." She barely registered the compliment. Her mind was still in the fight, still hearing the crackle of laser fire, still feeling the weight of the trigger beneath her finger. She had killed today. And for the first time in her life, she didn't regret it. Dane's voice came through the comms. "Everyone meet in the war room. Now." Character development, the burden of choice. The war room was dimly lit, the holographic table in the center flickering to life with a rotating tactical display of their current position. The rest of the crew was already there: Torin, the pilot Alara, and a few others whose names Lyrian had yet to learn. Dane stood at the head of the table, arms crossed over his broad chest. His gaze swept across the room before settling on her. "You changed the course of that fight," he said simply. Lyrian felt the weight of his words. A part of her wanted to deflect, to pretend she had only followed orders. But she hadn't. "I just saw an opening," she said, voice steady despite the uncertainty curling in her stomach. Dane tilted his head slightly. "And you took it." There was something in his gaze, something assessing. Not judgment, not praise, but recognition. Torin leaned back against the bulkhead. "The Zethri won't let this go. We embarrassed them today." Alara scoffed. "We do that a lot." "This was different," Dane said. "They weren't just after the ship. They were after her." The room went still. Lyrian stiffened. "You think they'll come for me again?" Dane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped a command into the console, bringing up a transmission intercepted from the Zethri network. A message flickered onto the screen, scrolling in harsh, angular script. Torin cursed. "That's a bounty." Lyrian's stomach twisted. "Congratulations," Alara said dryly. "You're officially worth more than most of us." Dane's expression was unreadable. "They don't take well to losing what they think they own." The words hit harder than she expected. Because that was what this was, wasn't it? The Zethari didn't just want vengeance. They wanted to reclaim their property. Except she wasn't theirs anymore. Lyrian clenched her fists. Then let them come. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Dane's mouth. Building tension, an offer made. The meeting adjourned, but Lyrian didn't leave immediately. She lingered as the others filed out, watching Dane as he shut down the holographic display. After a beat, he turned to her. You're thinking too much. She exhaled sharply. Can't help it. He leaned against the table, studying her. You don't regret what you did out there? It wasn't a question. She shook her head. No. A moment of silence stretched between them before he spoke again. Then what are you afraid of? Lyrian swallowed. I don't know who I am without the chains. Dane's gaze didn't waver. Then figure it out. Something in his tone sent a strange warmth through her chest. He didn't offer meaningless comfort, didn't try to soften the reality of her situation. He just gave her the truth. She hesitated before asking the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment he had removed her cuffs. Why did you save me? Dane exhaled through his nose, gaze flicking away for the first time. When he answered, his voice was quieter, rougher. Because someone once did the same for me. Lyrian's breath caught. She had assumed, like so many before him, that he had saved her out of pity. But now she saw it for what it was, a debt repaid, a cycle broken. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was more than what the Zethari had made her. Dane pushed off the table. We're making a supply stop in a few hours. After that you decide. She frowned. Decide what? He met her gaze. Whether you're staying. Climactic moment, a new path chosen. Lyrian stood on the observation deck, staring out at the endless stretch of stars. The weight of the decision sat heavy on her shoulders. She could leave. Take whatever credits she could scrounge and disappear, start over somewhere far beyond Zethari reach. Or she could stay. She flexed her fingers, remembering the feeling of the turret's trigger beneath her hand. Remembering the thrill of fighting back, of winning. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting. The door slid open behind her. Dane's footsteps were quiet but deliberate. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, arms crossed. After a moment, he finally said, What do you want, Lyrian? She inhaled. Exhaled. Then she turned to face him. To stop running. His eyes searched hers for a long moment before he nodded. Then let's get to work. Outside, the stars stretched on, infinite and waiting. For the first time, Lyrian stepped forward by choice.